Good afternoon, everyone, and to our friends on the West Coast, good morning. And welcome to today's webinar. We're holding this webinar today in order to ensure that you have all the information you need to make an informed decision when you vote on the proposed changes to ESA's governance model, and to answer any questions you may have. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping notes. All callers will be muted for the duration of the call. However, we encourage you to submit any questions you have by using the question log in the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. We'll address all of these questions at the end of the webinar. Also, we will record this webinar and post it to the member-only resource center on esaweb.org. So let's get right to it. We've got some introductions to make. And first off, it's my pleasure to be joined today by our president, Angela White, and two very engaged volunteer leaders that are entrenched in a lot of the activities here at ESA. We have Mr. Jamie Voss and Mr. Bart Williams. So to start things off, I'd like each of you just to say a few words about yourself and your business in this industry. Angela, would you mind starting?
Thanks, Merlin. Good afternoon. Excuse me, everyone. I'm Angela White, and as Merlin had said, I am the current president of ESA. I owned a business in Vermont for 22 years and currently am a partner in Central One Security in Wisconsin.
Fantastic. And how about Mr. Williams? Bart?
Thank you, Merlin. My name is Bart Williams. I'm current president of the Mississippi chapter of ESA and also own Security Solutions that's based in Starkville, Mississippi. I started it in 1993. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And Jamie?
So Jamie Voss, and I have Security Solutions, another Security Solutions Northwest up in Washington State. I'm second generation in the industry. My brother and I bought it from my dad about 10 years ago, and I've been in the industry a little over 20 years.
Fantastic. We appreciate all of you participating in this webinar today. I want to go over the goals of the governance aspect for ESA. These goals were established by a governance task force that was put into place to review the current model and offer any recommendations for a proposed new model. This process started back in 2013, where we recognized the need for ESA to remain relevant and attract the next generation of volunteer leaders. So a task force was formed to evaluate that structure. The guidelines that were formulated consisted of 4 simple goals. We wanted to ensure that all entities and programs within ESA are high impact and add value to members and the industry. We needed a governance model that supported efficient, effective, and strategic decision-making. We needed to increase the ability of members of the association to identify and discuss issues and to have input into the governing actions. Then lastly, maximize the benefits of all stakeholders related to time, resources, and financial investment dedicated to ESA governance. Angela, I'd like to start with you. You've been serving as ESA president since last July, and prior to that, you were president-elect. You attended the American Society of Association Executives Symposium to prepare yourself for your role as president. Can you fill us in a bit on what you learned about the role of volunteer board members?
Absolutely. Thank you, Merlin. As you can all see on your screen right now, there are definitions for the roles and responsibilities of an association board member. I'm not going to read these to you, and as Merlin had already stated, these will be posted on our member-only site for your review. I do feel it's important for those of you who don't know me is to make sure that you understand that I did serve on the ESA Board of Directors as a representative from Vermont for 6 years before being elected to the Executive Committee. In addition, I was an active participant on the governance task force. Another note that I wanted to share with everyone, while traveling to states, the one thing that I seem to hear with some repetition is that the task force set out to shrink our current board. Just as a point of clarification, as you saw in the objectives slide, the task force had four very specific initiatives, none of which were to reduce the size of the board. The approved model is a direct result of over 600 collective hours of research by that task force, which consisted of 12 volunteers and was led by an association expert in governance. I really appreciate that you're investing an hour with us today to educate yourself on this important issue, and I firmly believe that the proposed model you'll see today will ensure an effective use of our volunteers' time and also allow ESA to remain relevant and attract the next generation of volunteer leaders. It will also create a new governance model where board members are held accountable and actually fulfill their fiduciary duties. Merlin, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you, Angela. Let's take a moment to just look at the steps that we've taken thus far relative to preparing this model for the members to vote on. Discussion around updating the governance structure began as far back as 2015. It was around 2014 where the board of directors created a governance task force, and as Angela just mentioned, they dedicated countless hours in researching and developing this new model. Throughout that process, the task force engaged experienced association experts in the development of the proposed model. Over the course of a couple of years, we actually had 2 association experts involved in this process, and one that actually spoke at our leadership summit. The board of directors itself invested some hours discussing and investigating prior to approving the proposed model in June of 2016. At that point, the board approved moving forward with the next step, which was to prepare the model, primarily the bylaw changes necessary for this to be adopted, for presentation to the members that will actually take place this June during our election period. At this time, I want to illustrate the current structure of the proposed changes, or the current structure of our governance model, actually, to give you a sense for those not familiar of what our structure is made, how our structure is made up. It starts with an executive committee. Primarily, this committee functions and handles decisions in between board meetings. So they are invested with the authority to make decisions on behalf of the association in between board meetings. And much of their role is developing strategy and initiatives centered around providing value to the members and the industry. This committee is made up of 8 voting members that are elected by the membership. 2 of them are non-voting for a total of 10 members on the board. There are 4 vice presidents, a secretary, a treasurer, a past president, and a president. And then the executive director and legal counsel also serve on this committee. One important note that the governance task force identified is that each one of these voting members is from a chapter. Many of our officers and volunteers reside in chapters and typically come to the executive committee from one of those chapters. As I mentioned earlier, decisions are made by this committee between board meetings, and it was identified that by doing so, in some cases, it creates a level of mistrust between an executive committee and a board, who are both empowered to make decisions on behalf of the organization. There's also what we refer to as a chapter meeting. Now, this chapter meeting takes place twice a year. It consists of 32 chapters represented. So 32 individuals participate in this meeting. It was actually created to help reduce the amount of time spent in a board meeting. It gave board members, the chapter representatives primarily, an opportunity to discuss the agenda items on the board meeting in an informal setting prior to that meeting happening. This aided greatly in reducing the board meetings that in some cases were taking place over the course of 2 days down to 8 hours and then further down to approximately 4 hours. And then there's a board of directors, and that board of directors currently consists of 45 voting members with the potential for 17 more. And the reason why I say that is 32 of those board members are chapter representatives. If we were to someday have all 50 states represented with a chapter, then that would increase the board by 17. That board meets twice a year to primarily hear information and receive committee reports. And that's why it was determined that this board is more of an informational board rather than a board that is strategic in nature. A couple of interesting notes that the Governance Task Force determined. ESA itself has no part in the selection process for 32 of the 45 voting members, nor is there any criteria for skill set in place to determine who those board members may be. There's no minimum or maximum term limit that a board member can serve. There's no accountability for participation, preparedness, or engagement. The other thing is that there's no representation for non-chartered states. And currently, ESA has well over 500 members in states that do not have a chapter aligned with or affiliated with ESA. There's a tremendous cost, not only to ESA, but also to the board members that serve to attend 2 face-to-face meetings each year. And as you can imagine, the size of the board effectively makes it difficult to utilize technology like conference calls or other types of technology to have additional meetings for this board. Let's take a look at what a typical board meeting might look like. So the size of the board in infrequent meetings makes it difficult for strategic discussion and decision-making to take place. We rarely ever have 2 consecutive board meetings with the exact same people in attendance. So you can imagine with people coming on and off, it's really hard to keep them engaged and focused on what the board is currently working on. The inconsistencies makes it almost impossible to develop collaborative working relationships among board members. We recognize that some board members find no value in attending, while others are unprepared or disengaged. In our current structure, it's a significant investment of resources just to disseminate information. Based on attendance and preparation and engagement, you really end up with about 15 or so individuals prepared to make decisions on behalf of the association. I want to bring in our panel now and ask them a few questions. Jamie, I'll start with you. You've been on the board for about 4 years now. What are your thoughts on how the current structure of this board functions?
I just thank you, Merlin, and I look forward to presenting here today. But when I think back to my time on the board, and I think when I first walked in that room, I mean, I walked into a room full of people. I mean, 50 people, for goodness sakes, right? And just the amount, number one, but number two, the discussion really wasn't engaging. I mean, you had a couple of really strong voices. You had a lot of people that probably, like it says, was unprepared. And ultimately, it felt like it was either going to be a rubber stamp or a veto, I guess. And I really looked at it and I'm like, well, why are we here? And so I guess ultimately I look at it and I say it doesn't really function from my perspective.
Art, you've been on the board for a few years now as well. What are your thoughts on how this board currently functions?
Well, the first time I attended a board meeting, it was quite intimidating. I walked in, there's a lot of people there, and I kind of felt like a deer in the headlights. The the function of the board, as I see it, is, as you mentioned a few moments ago, Merlin, it is an informative board. Primarily, we meet 2 times a year where a lot of information is discerned or is presented to the board, and the board retains an oversight function that's there. With a lot of people, the executive committee and the other committees are where a lot of the heavy lifting occurs. But there again, our board retains the oversight function, and the assimilation of information occurs there.
So Jamie, I'll ask you, based on it being an informational board, what value does the ESA derive from the current model?
You know, if I were to make a stretch, and I'd say that there's the opportunity to hear from the individual states in a formal setting, right? So I think if ESA were to say it derives one thing, that would be the benefit. However, I think the negatives far over cascade that. So unfortunately, I don't see a lot of benefit that ESA National gets from it.
And I'll ask this of Bart to you. Is this, in your mind, is this the ideal way for ESA to make decisions?
I think a lot of the decisions will be made probably as they're made today through committee, through the executive committee. The functions or the benefit I see, I guess, about the ESA board are a couple. Really, the charter chapters have representation, and that's a very important thing to us in Mississippi, is that we feel like, you know, we're part of this and we want our vote, we want our voice to be heard. The proposed governance model gives us a lot of concern in that sense. And final authorities at this level, the degree of oversight that can be maintained at this board level. Again, this is not a board that sits there and has a lot of activity or things happen in that meeting. It's where information is displayed, and the ability to have the oversight of the other committees is present, is what I see in the benefit. The very number one benefit of the board as it exists today is maintaining representation.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. So let me stop here and remind everyone that now's a great time to send in your questions electronically, and we'll be answering those questions, and our panel will be answering those questions towards the end of this presentation. All right, let's move on. So we just presented the current model. Now let's dive in and talk a little bit about the proposed model that's in place. This model, as mentioned earlier, developed by a task force of 12 individuals that dedicated hundreds of hours to this proposed model, and ultimately approved by the board of directors last June in a vote of 22-10, to then send it to the membership for their final approval. As you can see on the slide, the proposed model at a very high level is recommending that we create a board of directors of 15 individuals, and at the same time that we eliminate the need and redundancy for an executive committee. It's also proposing that a chapter council be created, that this become a formal body within the governance structure of ESA. 5 of those individuals would be elected by council members to serve on the board of directors, which consists of 15 total seats. The other 10 seats would be elected positions. The council would consist of 32 representatives. Each chapter would have a seat on the council. In addition, ESA's committees and professional groups, which sometimes we forget, this is the area where things really get done, where the work gets done, and typically this is who brings recommendations for either changes to existing programs or to create new programs to the board of directors for a decision. The reason we have an executive committee today, and actually the reason many associations have executive committees, is because of the board size. And based on that and the difficulty it may have from time to time to be strategic, have collaboration between board meetings, what ends up happening is organizations move to create an executive committee. The governance task force saw one example of an organization where not only was the size of the board large, but they continued to increase the size of the executive committee. And over time, the result was they had to create a steering committee that ultimately was able to be strategic and guide the association. So, and they continued to increase the size of the executive committee and board to the point where they had to create another body to help in their governance effort. To dive in a little deeper into the proposed model, currently we have standing committees and professional groups. We have 14 standing committees and 3 professional groups. And as I said, these groups investigate and vet programs and services offered by ESA. This is where members and chapters can have the biggest influence and the loudest voice, quite frankly, and be most effective in guiding this organization, and that's by populating committees and professional groups. The executive committee would be eliminated based on redundancy, and this would allow for the board of directors to be the single decision-making authority within the organization. As it relates to the chapter council, a representative from each chapter serves on a formal council which acts as in an advisory capacity to the board of directors. Those meetings would promote interchange among chapters and provide an opportunity for chapters to participate in the governance process. And as I mentioned earlier, this group will be responsible for electing their 5 representatives to the board of directors, giving the chapter council and councils and chapters in general representation on the board. Jamie, let me go to you for a question here. What do you see as the pros and cons of this change?
I guess the one con that I hear in I somewhat can understand is that we do lose the vote as a chapter, but I really don't see that as a con. I really see it as a pro, and the reason I see it as a pro is because of the increase in representation. And with that increase in representation, by taking from the chapter states, putting 5 on the board of directors who's going to be involved in the strategic initiative, strategic planning, I think it gives the chapter council a lot more influence over the direction as it relates to the states. And I also think that it brings what's currently the executive committee and the charter chapter states meeting, I think it brings us into full alignment. So I think their influence, alignment, and representation, I think it's going to do a lot to be able to grow our organization.
So Bart, up to this point, can you provide your perspective on what the proposed model offers and doesn't offer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you again, Merlin. The positives that we're talking about here, I think, without a doubt, are things we need to be looking at doing. You know, we're in an industry that changes very fast. We've got to look at reinventing our companies almost daily, monthly. Same thing with the association. We need to constantly look and strive how to become more efficient, more agile. And I think there's so many positives that are there. The one con, as Jamie mentioned, you know, is the representation issue. And I just can't wrap my mind around how we go from 32 seats to 5. We're gaining representation. The executive committee can accomplish all these. I think it can, with a little adjusting, giving them a little bit more authority that they don't have now, can accomplish the positive things that we're looking at in this model. And the task force, the 600 hours, man, they spent a lot of time and did a lot of good work that showed a lot of things that needed to happen. But I just think we can achieve it a different way with maintaining representation. And that, just to keep going back to that, it's kind of the sticking point from my perspective.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. So the last piece to this governance model, the proposed model, is the board of directors. And this board of directors would consist of 13 members, voting members, and 2 non-voting members. We envision this board meeting 12 times a year rather than on 2 occasions as they currently do. And we also envision them being able to use technology to accomplish that, as well as face-to-face meetings throughout the year. So we view this as an opportunity to have a diverse and nimble board of directors that can be collaborative and strategic when making decisions and setting the course for the association. Just to recap, this model eliminates the executive committee and creates a formal chapter council, resulting in one engaged and strategically focused 15-member board of directors. The board would consist of a chairman, a vice chairman, a secretary-treasurer, an immediate past chairman, 5 council representatives, 1 national company member, 1 associate member, 2 at-large directors, and then non-voting members of the executive director and legal counsel. But I feel like you've made it clear that you're concerned about your chapter losing its representation on the board. Can you explain a bit more? How does that help or hurt Mississippi in your mind?
In respects to Mississippi, simply put, my concern is that we would lose our vote at the national level. From a standpoint, Mississippi has 2 senators that gets to go to Washington and vote regardless of our population, regardless of other things. And kind of feel that democratic model is the way this thing was. We paid our dues, we get our vote. It's kind of a selfish comment, but that's part of the thing that's driving us being against this. I also try to look at ESA. What is ESA made of? The main demographic that makes up ESA is a 1 to 5 employee company. And as I look at that, at least I've told my constituents in the state of Mississippi, and we've tried to educate, not influence, but educate people, or ask people to educate themselves on this topic and come to their own conclusion. And it is unanimous that with the people we talk to, that is, oh, if I don't have a vote, I don't want to be part of that. Now, that's a knee-jerk reaction. There are a lot of good things that happen, but that's where we're at, simply put. And I think the 1 to 5 member company being a lot of what makes up ESA, I would think that consensus would be in other places. I know there are other states that have issues as well with this. So hopefully that's kind of helping me explain why I'm at the side of this that I am.
Thank you. Jamie, do you think the chapters will lose their voice on the board of directors?
No, and I pretty much stated that earlier with the chapter council. I mean, just to kind of say, I think it gives the ability for the chapters to be able to influence a lot more the strategic direction, and I really like that. So they actually have a lot more influence over the strategic initiatives that are happening instead of being reported to and then getting to choose one way or the other, either throwing away a lot of hard work, maybe not understanding the full breadth of what that means. And then also that brings the council, the chapter council, into alignment with the board, and I think that could be a very, very powerful combination. So again, I just state I think it's actually an increase.
Yeah, and Jamie, in addition, so the council or the board will have 5 council representatives designated, but as I mentioned earlier, and has been the case for as far back as I can remember, the people that typically get elected to serve in the other positions, either on the executive committee or in this case in this proposed board model, generally come from chapter states. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Angela's a great example of that. I know, Mike Miller in the past, and I think we can think of a lot of others that have done the same thing. So, I mean, there's a lot that's true about that, yes.
And in the end, as Angela pointed out, based on the responsibilities of a board member, the fiduciary responsibilities, it's incumbent upon all of these directors to be there and represent the members of the organization. So let's keep moving here. And again, reminder: if you have any questions, please email them in. We're just about to the end when we'll start taking questions. This structure meets the goals of the new governance model as a diverse, engaged, collaborative body of volunteers with a consistent board that operates at a strategic level. Jamie, based on your previous comments, sounds like you're in favor. Would you agree?
I am.
So tell us, is there anything else that you can think of that these changes and how these changes provide any type of benefit to ESA moving forward?
Yeah, you know, we talked about it before, and Bart put it really well. We need to have a board that's extremely nimble, the ability to be able to make decisions, turn on a dime in an ever-changing world. I mean, here we're going to have, for the first time, sometimes 4 generations coming into one workplace, and the challenges that's bringing to each of our companies, not to mention an association which is thriving on volunteers and part of the gas that goes in the engine. We need the ability to have a very nimble, a very effective, a very strategic board that has the authority to make decisions that need to be made right now. And I believe firmly that this particular model gives both the councils, the chapter council, and the board the ability to be able to come into alignment on those issues and be able to adjust very quickly. So I really look forward, if this goes through, to see how this will change the organization for the better.
Thank you, Jamie. And Bart, based on your previous comments, sounds like you might not be in favor of this proposed change. What are your concerns with the proposed changes that are being put forth?
The loss of representation, I think I made it clear that that's the single biggest concern that we have, but what can happen past that is, you know, we go from 32 states to 5. It's just hard for me to understand how that we gain representation by doing that. But this management structure can create a situation where a rogue board is more apt to having, or the perception of a few individuals running the board. As we mentioned earlier, that exists maybe a little bit with the executive committee now. And a lot of times, whether it's reality or not, for what it's worth, my opinion is that's not the case that's happening at ESA. People are trying to do what's in the best interest, but they're nevertheless, if the perception is created that you've got a few people running this, it can really create a lot of disarray in an organization, and a lot of time and energy can be spent off the action items that we need to be thinking about. And I know there are a lot of people that are out there, the states, that are really concerned about if this were to go the way, the perception that the governance, that we will lose our seat, that there are states that may or may not want to remain part of ESA. And that's just hearsay at the moment, but to me, it's a real concern, you know, about keeping ESA strong and keeping it the best association that it can be.
Fantastic. Thank you. So as a reminder, this is how influence, or this is how members can influence the direction of ESA. We have committees and groups, 14 committees. We have 4 task force that are currently operating, some professional groups, as well as subcommittees. The real work gets done at the committee level. Member influence and the chapter voice is most effective by populating committees and groups. Jamie, you serve on a committee. In this new model, how do you see committees influencing the direction of ESA and key initiatives of the organization?
I think one of the things that, I mean, I just got the pleasure of being able to be invited to the strategic planning meeting, and then also the privilege to be able to serve there, along with Bart, and both of us serve on the finance committee. Understanding now fully the impact of the committees, the amount that the committee's input influences the strategic direction of our organization as it stands currently, and then also the ability that our board of directors really puts, or our executive committee, I really should say, our executive committee listens to that, really says there's a lot of work that goes on in committees. They're very, very powerful. Great way to get involved, get your feet wet, get started through that process. And I think it actually grows in influence. But ultimately, I just encourage everybody, if you're listening, you should be considering serving on a committee.
And Bart, you also, as Jamie pointed out, serve on the finance committee. How do you feel about working through committees and professional groups to influence the direction of ESA?
I'd like to echo what Jamie said. I couldn't agree more. And regardless of what the board of directors is made up like in 6 months or 6 years from now, the work is done on the committees. Volunteers come in with staff, roll up their sleeves, and they accomplish things, and great things happen in those committees. And as Jamie said, I recommend to anyone, get involved with the committees. You know, You can go to church and sit on the pew, but when you get involved in mission work, you get on the committees and you go do things and you make things happen. So I couldn't agree more with that. That's where it happens.
Great, thank you. So let's go to our attendees today on this webinar and see if there are any questions. Shannon, I understand you are controlling that for us. Do you have any questions from the audience?
I do. There's been a bunch of great questions coming in. So the first that we'll start with is actually a two-part question, and that is, how effective can a board be when there are musical chairs? How do you get any decisions made?
Jamie, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, I personally believe that we have that board right now and we're not effective, so it's probably better if someone else answers that one.
And I might have stepped on Bart. Bart, were you wanting to answer that?
I'd be glad to give my perception on it, of course. As we kind of stated throughout this, our board at this moment is an informational board, not an action board. I think we retain the representative element, but we all kind of agreed that the executive committee is where a lot of the heavy lifting is currently happening. Just giving them greater empowerment gives them the ability to act quicker. The governor's model with a 15-member board does the same thing, but we retain the representation issue that seems to be the problem. With musical chairs in the current structure, you've got that, and for 30, 40, 45 people to sit there and do the micromanagement of an organization, is not a realistic expectation. But again, we're an informative board at the moment.
Great. Shannon, do you have any more?
I do. There'll be a bunch more. So the next one is, I understand that charter chapters want representation, but wouldn't the fact that 5 directors will be elected from among chartered chapter representatives provide a better way for chapters to be involved in more day-to-day direction and oversight into the operations of ESA as part of a strategic board?
Great question. Who would like to take that one?
I'll take it.
James, go ahead.
There again, forgive my Mississippi math, but when we go from 32 to 5, I just see a loss of representation there. Again, the strategic functions that we talk about won't be accomplished with a 45-member board or thereabouts, I don't think. We've got other mechanisms in place that can do that. The perception, to me, it's reality. We have a seat, Mississippi does, as does every charter chapter that abides by that agreement. To go to 5, we lose that degree of representation.
Jamie, you put into perspective how the representation increases, and I think you even put a percentage to it. Could you maybe explain that?
I don't remember the percentage I put to it. If I said that, I don't remember. But what I would say is, as I look at the Charter Chapter Council right now, as we stand, we have certain discussions. We have certain things that we create influence on amongst each other, and then we come into a board of directors meeting, which is strictly informational. So that feedback really never comes into that overall board of directors meeting. And unless we have someone there that's really passionate that wants to get involved in some sort of a committee, we really have no influence over the way the organization goes. So as far as representation is concerned, if one vote in 50 is important in that feels like representation, I guess that is a true statement. However, when I say representation, true change can happen through proper representation, and that's what I see the 5 people being able to do, is really be able to carry the torch of the charter chapter, their feelings, their initiatives, our ability to be able to influence this organization. It really becomes a very, very powerful subcommittee or committee of ESA. So that's how I see the representation increasing. And then once again, I think it brings the two groups into alignment, which Merlin stated, sometimes there's this mistrust between the two. But having 5 that are able to come back, put their hats on and say, this is what we did, this is the work we did, look at this. Now it's your time to comment. Tell us what you don't like about it. Let me bring it back. I think that's true representation.
Fantastic. Shannon, another question?
Yes, and I know we're covering this a lot, but this is a really specific question about representation. So this one is, since the ESA is made up of state chapters, shouldn't the chapter council have a larger representation at the board level? Maybe 10 of the 15 rather than just 5. Jamie might have kind of covered that, but I just wanted to make sure we really address the direct question there.
So repeat the question for me? Should the first part?
So it's really asking about having a larger representation at the board level, and the suggestion in question is maybe 10 of the 15 rather than just 5.
Yeah, that was it's a good question, because that was discussed quite a bit, not only by the task force, but by the board of directors. And what some people may not realize is the initial proposal that was presented to the board of directors showed 3 representatives from the chapter council. And through surveys and discussion amongst board members, a second model was proposed, or some changes to the first model were proposed, and that went from 3 to 5. Any thoughts on why not grow it to 10? You know, Bart, from your perspective, any thoughts on where is the right number? I mean, if you go to 10, why not just keep it at 32, or what are your thoughts there?
That's kind of my thought. I mean, from where my hang up with is representation. The charter chapter states you get a vote to my vote. If we're going to, reduce the board and you're going to go to the governor's model, if you add 5 more seats on there, I'm assuming, or if you move it around from 5 to 10, you still don't maintain the representation element that bothers me. And now we may be moving back in the direction of that cumbersome board that seems to be the negative that we're all trying to improve upon. So while it's a great idea, I think every charter chapter should have a representative seat. To speak back just a second to what Jamie was saying about people engaged and stuff, you're right. There are people coming there that aren't engaged, and the states need to be sending people all. We need to force people to be engaged, or try to encourage them to be as engaged as they can. But the proposed model concerns me with the 5 seats we're going to present that come from the Charter Council of qualified candidates. Initial research shows they may not be there, so we may be, on a smaller scale, guilty of the same thing if we can't find a fix for that. Sorry, I got off track on that question.
Oh, that's great. Great input. Shannon, do you have another question? We
do. We have lots. So this is more of a process question. I think it's really important to cover some clarification here. We're getting, this is 2 parts. Is the June meeting for us to vote this forward? Has there been any further action since the last vote? So Merlin, if you can recap that again, I think that would be great for the audience.
So since the board of directors approved the model and directed the bylaws committee to prepare the changes for membership vote, the bylaws committee has been working to incorporate those changes into the bylaws. So when this is presented to the members for vote, it'll be done through mail, so all members have an opportunity to cast a vote either for or against. And the changes will be clearly identified through strike-throughs and new incorporated language. And we'll provide both a version that shows the track changes, but also a version that shows a clean version, so that you can read through it without having to read through a lot of the strike-throughs. So those will be presented again for a mail-in ballot election. It'll happen at the same time that we elect officers. It'll be part of the ballot. If we have a contested election for officers, if we don't, then it'll just be the bylaw changes that are being proposed. They will go out, the ballots have to go out by May 19th, and they have to be returned to the ESA office by June 9th. And there'll be more information coming out relative to that. Shannon, any more questions?
Yes, sir. So in the new model, where is the check and balance of what the board is doing?
Jamie, why don't you take that one? Check and balance.
Yeah, I firmly believe again that sits at the council level, but ultimately, if we don't like what the board is doing, the members have the ultimate vote. They can vote out the representation, just like we do at the national level. So whether we have a very large board, whether we have a very small board, I think a small engaged board is more likely to make a better, more informed decision. And really, as far as the oversight is concerned, it's not a huge concern of mine. But once again, you've got the ability for the Charter Council to have 5 seats on that thing, and they've got the ability to be able to rotate those seats. You've also got membership that can vote out the current leadership and get new leadership in. So that's where I believe it really falls back to the members.
So ultimately, these are elected positions by the general membership, and just as they are today. So the membership has the opportunity to speak through their vote in the election process. Bart, anything to add?
May I address? Yes, please. My answer to that question, there is no oversight. The council under the new governor's model is not a voting body. They are an advisory board. They cannot, the board is where the control is left. That, back after the representation issue, the oversight issue I mentioned, is my secondary concern, as I see it.
So what oversight exists today with the board of directors?
The board of directors have this power to reel in a committee or decision, and under where I feel we could improve and do the things that we see that need to be done is if you give, leave the executive committee like it is, leave it at 8, forget 15. Apple's got 7 on their board. Give them 8 people, give them the authority to do this. Go from 2 meetings to 1 a year for the general board. But at that moment, if something's done, if something's gone wrong, the board, that being the 49-member board, has the ability to reel them back in. That's where the oversight mechanism kicks in my opinion. If you try to go to membership to do something, if you do it with a new governor's body, it's a very big beast to accomplish. Now, at least on an annual basis or semi-annual, if we remain with 2 meetings a year, we have the ability to reel in a committee, to reel in the executive committee if something's gone against the wishes of what you feel the membership is. That's how I see it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Shannon, next
Marlon,
question.
I have a nice segue here. Has there ever been an important issue that the executive committee was in favor of that the big board then voted down? Marlon, that's probably for you, most history here.
Yeah, that's a good question. Very rarely is there ever a situation where the board, well, to my knowledge, the board has never overturned a decision by the executive committee. What has happened is the executive committee has hesitated making decisions and has instead, for primarily political reasons, because they wanted to not make a decision that the board may not agree with, has instead sent those decisions on to the board to be made. And as you can obviously see, that kind of process slows things down, especially when you have a board that meets twice a year and doesn't create that nimble atmosphere that's necessary for an organization to function in today's environment. Would anyone else like to add? Yep. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. In 14, I think there was a decision, I don't know if it came from the executive committee, but an educational-based decision that the board of directors went against either a committee or someone did. But you bring up a very good point, Merlin. Meeting twice a year, you're not agile, can't make the decision. If you go with a smaller board that is agile, or you give the control to the executive committee, as I'm arguing for, I guess, that's a risk you take. There might be something that goes against it. You can't wait 6 months to make a decision. We understand that, but you've got to give some trust to that committee at that point. But again, the oversight mechanism is retained in case somebody goes rogue.
Fantastic. Shannon, next question.
Yes. How are the national company and associate member board of director representatives chosen?
Good question. So those individual positions are chosen by that group of membership. So associate members would elect their representative and national companies would elect their representative. That's how it currently is in today's structure. And as it stands right now, that is the proposed mechanism for placing those individuals in the new structure. Next question.
Yes, this is actually for Angela. Do you think the small companies will get lost in the proposed board?
I do not. What I have heard, and I respect everybody's opinion, especially with regard to oversight. We have no accountability right now, and from a small member's position, and Bart, I applaud you for pointing out that most of our members are 1 to 5, 5 to 10. I've been in both of those positions. I think that what holds true is that 90-10 rule. The 90% who get in, or I'm sorry, the 10% that get involved will continue to have whatever they need and whatever their voice is to be heard. But in the new structure, we have much more accountability. There's not going to be an opportunity for somebody to come to a board meeting and not be prepared, whether they're a national company member, a 5-company member. I don't think that the direction and our mission statement is not going to change by changing our governance. We will still represent our members, I believe, every bit, if not better, than we currently do.
And just to add to that point, I think you know, a lot of people miss the fact that Angela, yourself, Marshall, who served as president before you, John Knox, who served before him, Dom Discoli, Mike Miller, these are all companies that are small in size. I mean, these are not national companies. They're not large regional companies, in fact. They're small operators, which is the typical. I believe it's just under 70% of our members have 10 or less employees. So they've been well represented over the years, and I agree. I don't see that changing. Shannon, next question.
Okay, so I know a lot of you have entered questions. I just want to let you know I'm trying to get through all of them. There's just a lot in here. So there's a question, Marlon, this is probably an easy one. Will any electronic voting be available?
Yeah, unfortunately, as it stands right now, this is going to be mail-in ballots only. It will not be electronic. And the reason for that is we're going through a technology change here in the office, and we're transitioning from one database to another. We're expected to go live with the new database at the end of April, but we don't want to take any chances and miss anybody from having a chance to vote electronically, because people are going to have to log in, create new profiles, things of that nature. So we want to make it as simple as possible. So it will be by mail more than likely.
Okay. And there's another question. Can a copy of the presentation be available to present to our members? Do you want to take that one real quick?
Sure. We'd be glad to share it with the group. There is a plan to have one more webinar with a different panel. And we plan on doing that, Shannon, remind me, is that in May?
I believe it's April 11th.
Okay. So,
but we'll get more information out.
We'll get more information out, but we'll definitely do another webinar. We'll make this available, and the recording is also going to be available under the members only section. So, next question.
All right, this is a really long one, so bear with me for a second, but this person has asked a few questions. I want to make sure we get to address them. So for when the time comes, half of the chapters that represent members are present 2 times per year to make sure that the members are represented and aware and to be involved with the decisions. The main issue when the task force started was the Illinois law and concerns over number of directors and consistency and the concerns of cost to have potentially 32. However, there was another model that was presented that was not voted on, but it addressed that issue. I think the major issue is the lack of volunteers to take on the 12 meetings. I think that it would be easier to accept if the member voice was still there with those that have dedicated their time and continue to be there and wanting to be involved. Being involved 2 of 12 times is an issue. Why wouldn't a model with 10 directors from the chapters with, say, 4 to 6 meetings a year, 2 in person, 1 to 2 in Texas, and 2 via conference collaboration would meet the needs of ESA, Illinois, and the members?
I'm not sure there's a question in it. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a question in there.
The question was why wouldn't I think the question was why wouldn't that model meet the needs of the members?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer. You know, primarily because a lot of this was discussed by a task force of 12 people representing various segments of the organization, including chapters, and the output was ultimately the model that you see before you. There was an alternative that was presented as an effort to the board. It had not been vetted through the governance task force process, but was allowed to be presented, and ultimately the board chose this model over that one. So not sure, anybody have anything else to add? Jamie, Bart, Angela?
You know, Shannon, if I heard the actual question, it was talking about meeting 4 or 6 times a year. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I think increasing the size of the board and reducing the frequency of meetings.
Okay. I think that anybody who, Marlon, you can attest to this, anybody who's been on the executive committee would understand that we could never address the needs of the association by not meeting once a month. The executive committee meets monthly. Those calls are an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And Merlin and I would say if we don't talk 4 times a week, it's a slow week. So I could never understand how we could run the association by not having a minimum of those 12 meetings a year.
And for the benefit of some of the folks on the call, the organization is complex. It has, it's not just ESA, but it also has 3 subsidiaries that it is involved in as well. So fairly complex, a lot of moving parts, a lot of decisions being made on a continual basis. Shannon, next question.
Okay. Yes, this is actually somebody's asking Bart specifically. It seems that you are saying that by not necessarily having a seat on the board, you lose a voice, but that seems to diminish the new chapter council, which serves to provide the direct input of the chapters to the board through the directors it elects to the board. If the amended bylaws include a formal role for the chapter council, doesn't that necessarily maintain a strong voice for each chapter?
I think that's a good question. It's an excellent question. It's not losing voice, it's losing vote. Again, it goes back to representation. We've agreed to be a charter chapter. We want our vote that's there. In hearing your voice, I think that goes back to a lot of things we've mentioned earlier. Get involved in committees, get involved in other things within ESA, and I think your voice can resound and be heard louder, whether you're a voting member or not. I kind of look at those as separate issues. But, you know, we would lose our vote under this, which feeds to the representation. I hope I answered the question.
Shannon, we're getting close to.
We are.
Yep. We're getting close to the end.
There's a lot. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I think we have time for one or two more. Let's keep going if you can.
So the next one is, we keep hearing that representation would be lost, but we never hear exactly how that loss would be manifested by moving to this smaller structure. Can we please get a more concrete answer?
Okay, let me explain. Let's say we move to the governor's model that's got 5 people on the board. And let's say Bart Williams wants to, I put myself out to the executive council, and they put me on that board. And I go up there and vote. How do I know what's best for Arizona, who no longer has a seat on that board? Their representation, their vote is lost. Now, their voice is if they will come to me, but do I have time to listen to 32 states? Hopefully I do. I mean, as when we did that, there was one qualified person that raised their hand that would participate in this. So vetting that out is, to me, is a concern, number one. There.
Anyone else?
Does that answer the question?
Sure, yeah, I think that's a great answer.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Jamie or Angela, any thoughts on you know, Bart's comment where he's from Mississippi, so he's representing Mississippi and is doing what's best for Mississippi? Go ahead.
I apologize, Merlin. I do have a comment. If everybody would take an opportunity and go back and look at the roles when you come to the board, you're not supposed to be representing Arizona or California. Your role when you come to that board is to be making the best decisions for the association. Having been involved in this association for 10 years at various levels, not once, and Merlin, you might be able to help me, but not once have we ever made a decision that was state specific. So in moving toward a new governance model, those 5 representatives, which are now 5 of 15 rather than 1 of 49, they will still make decisions for the association and still have the input of the other 32 chapters to be able to help and guide the direction of the association. What is best for ESA in terms of education or government legislative initiatives or our membership or the benefits that we offer as an association, not anything particular to any one given state. We serve the members as a whole, not broken down individually.
I was being somewhat rhetorical in the response. With all due respect, Madam President, I was trying to be rhetorical in the response. And as a Mississippi representative going to a national meeting, I completely agree with it. I am to be there to represent what's in the best interest of ESA. I feel that I'm capable of doing a better job at that, at being finely tuned with my state and know what their needs and wants are and reflecting that with as of ESA, which I found very rarely are conflictory. You go to 5 people that are representing the entire country respectively, that knowledge, that information may be lost in the vastness of stuff that's there. That's a concern that I have. That doesn't really speak to the government or the representation issue that I hung up on. I think that speaks to a knowledge of our membership at the grassroots level, you know, at the face-to-face level, for what it's worth.
Merlin.
Go ahead, Jamie.
So the way I see it, and the way I see the state issue is the fact that right now we do have the ability to be able to say yes or no. We might be able to insert some discussion, but realistically it's informational. I think at the Charter Council meeting you have the ability to be able to have the state's voice heard clearly by all 5 representatives, that then get to go in and make strategic decisions and even bring that input in a much more strategic way to the board to be able to influence it in a way that can actually make those states and all of our states much stronger in our representation. So that's kind of the way I see it. Just a different.
Folks, I'm afraid we're out of time. This has been great information. Our goal today was to provide you some education from both points of view, and I really appreciate Jamie Voss and Bart Williams taking time out of their busy schedules to participate in this and agreeing to participate in this. And I want to thank Angela as well, and all of you for participating today. As a reminder, the recording of the webinar will be available in the members only section on esaweb.org. Going forward, all current primary voting representatives and secondary voting representatives of member companies eligible to vote will continue to receive additional information, including on how to vote. Feel free to direct any additional questions either to our president, Angela White, and you can see the information on the screen, and thank Jamie and Bart for making their contact information available. So if you'd like to get more perspective from either Jamie or Bart, that would be fantastic. Did I hear someone?
Merlin, I have one correction. My area code is 360, not 3305.
Oh, great. Thank you. 360. 360 area code. All right. So you're welcome to reach out to either Jamie or Bart to gain a deeper understanding of their perspectives. Everyone, have a great day, and thank you again for participating in this webinar.